Okay, audio visualize. This is video number 2. This is for a 4-string bass guitar. I'll try to move briskly with this. This is a E standard tuning EADG, which is referred to sometimes as Eat a Dead Grasshopper. This is fairly common, and this will get the point across. Top left visualization is audio basically being visualized. The darker the color, particularly red, is more energy, and as we get into blue and trails off, it's lighter in the amplitude scale, and it's harder to catch. And as we go up higher, we're going up higher up the scale. Lower is in the lower frequencies. Up is the higher frequencies. On the panel just to the, let me see if I can extend that over. Just to the right of that is something that's more like what you see when you look at a frequency response graph, where it goes from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. This is a little more on either end, but most of this is the same region that you're seeing. So while we go across the visualization of the spectrogram, you see this little green line. That's actually where it is, where the info is being picked up. That's the spot. It's not over here at this line. It's where this green line is. And then on the right, this box, which is the filter, is represented by this border right here, and that's what we're capturing. And then on the bottom is the actual music file. First thing we're going to do really quickly before we actually listen to the file is just to speak about the instrument for just a second. It's called a bass guitar, and here's something maybe you don't know. The bass frequency on a squiggling type of graph, or most graphs, is considered to be, generally speaking, about 300 hertz and below. Sub bass is around 60 hertz. The mid bass goes from really there to about 300 hertz, generally speaking. The bass guitar actually goes up to the audible range that is clear to the ear to around 4 to 5 kilohertz. Actually, there's energy that you can catch up there. You can see it on a spectrogram. You can hear it with your ear. That would mean that if you take 300 hertz out and then you just leave the remaining, that actually 94% of the audible information is in the mid range or the upper mids, and 6% is in the bass range for a bass guitar. The bass guitar represents and has 6% of its audio output, sonic replay that you can catch with the ear. 6% of it is in the bass region. Bass guitar, 6% of it in the bass region. 94 in the mids to upper mids. It is dominating the mid frequencies, which is kind of the reason why it's a controversial instrument, depending on your views. Now we're going to go ahead and go through the chord progression of E, A, D, and G. And then we're going to do it with just the bass and remove everything else. And then we're going to do it with everything except the bass. So let's go through this, and I'm going to skip a little bit. You can see again from 20 to 20 kilohertz. And we're right on the beginning. And this will be A. And you can see as that green line sweeps across and then to the far left, we're at about 300 hertz. Now you can see a step up about to approach. And that is A. And that is giving us info to about 400. And it's going to keep going up by about 100 hertz in core audible information every time we step up. And now we step up again, and now we're at about 500, a little bit more than that. And then as we get to the final one, which would be G, we're around 600 to 700, which should be right about there. And you see as that hits the far left, we have clear audible info to about 700 hertz. So let me go ahead and stop that for a second. Now I'm going to take this filter and I'm going to remove everything down to 300 hertz, which is, again, generally accepted to be the bass region, and 20 hertz. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't really have info below that. This file clearly does, because it's a bass guitar. Now I'm going to play just the bass with no mids and nothing else. Everything else is cut. There's no problem catching that. You can catch A easily. D. and G. Now what we're going to do is the opposite. We're going to invert this, and we're going to take everything and we're going to remove the bass from the bass guitar. So I'm going to take this up to 300 Hertz, and now the bass is gone because everything below this, you can see a visual, but it's not, the filter's cutting out everything below there. So let's adjust this one more time to 300. Now we're going to do the same progression. You can really hear the string here. And you can also hear the progression. Now that is completely out of the bass range. This is only the mids and the upper mids. All of that info is in the mid frequency. Now let's talk about, now you can see why there's issues with this. I'm going to talk about 4 types of tuning related to the bass guitar, related to earphones. The first is flat tuning, and that is where this entire range from 20 to basically the entire spectrum, not including the ear gain, which is of course a compensation bump, but the entire sub-bass and mid-bass region is flat. That is something that the Moondrop Illumination comes to mind, and I might post that up for you to take a look at. That is, it should seem like not a bad thing. However, if you have ever played bass guitar, which I have, though I'm not a bassist really, but I have played the guitar. I tried to be John Paul Jones in 2 weeks, and it didn't work out. If you've ever been in a room with a bassist, if you've ever played bass guitar, if you've ever heard a bassist tuning his guitar without an amp, it sounds different than what earphones with flat tuning sounds like. That sounds more dead, which is maybe overly negative, but it's a very kind of lifeless replay. If you elevate and you have something slightly different, you will get more energetic, and I'll talk about that more. But a flat tuning doesn't seem like a bad thing. However, it does seem to lack a sense of natural and realness if you've ever been to any kind of a show with an actual bassist. Again, it doesn't matter if he's plugged into an amp or not. It would sound different. The next type of tuning would be what I would consider to be very unideal, and that would be bloat. And that would be something like the Dunu Falcon Ultra Pro. Not really sure which version of it, but I'll put up the graph of the one that I had, the blue one. This is a bass that is going all the way to the ear gain. There is actually no correction. It goes all the way to the compensation for the ear gain. And that is a type of tuning that anybody who's familiar with production and mastering and musical instruments, the vocal range for male and female fundamentals is very close to the same thing, and they both stop just before or around where the ear gain starts to rise. They both exist in the meat, are in the mids and the mid bass really. There's some info more for male than female in the mid bass, but that section is critical for vocals. So when you have the rhythm section like drums and bass guitars that are playing over vocals, it really becomes a problem with overall res quality, and then you can get problems with masking when you're putting that much energy into a bass guitarist and a drummer. It can cause interference, and it degrades the quality of vocals, and it's a reason why the next type of tuning, which I'll put up, which is the Monarch, or what followed the Monarch original, which is the Moondrop Variations, they're actually going in the complete other direction, and that is cleaning out the mids by cutting into the mid bass. The problem with that is, as you could see when I'm showing you the demonstration, the core essential fundamentals of this instrument go all the way up to about 7 Hertz really. So when you're cutting into the mid bass that much, you're removing 2 of the 4 strings pretty much audibly. And that's why people listen to drum kits. Kick drums jumped out to me immediately when the Levy Breaks John Bonham was, it sounded barely like a kick drum. That was an immediate red flag. Listen to some bass guitar that I'm familiar with, and it sounded very poor as well. Hobby Talk did a brilliant video using a 10-band graphic equalizer showing you what EQing a tuck into a bass guitar sounds like versus not doing it. It's audible to you. Now, lots of people call themselves audiophile. It's kind of a meme because the actual meaning of an audiophile is the desire for high fidelity, and the definition for high fidelity is faithful reproduction, which you can't possibly have if you're taking half of a 4-string bass guitar and kind of cutting into it. And bass guitar exists in every genre that I'm familiar with. I've heard K-pop and J-pop, and there's bass guitar mixed in, whether it's on the mastering deck or they actually have a backing band, I don't know. It's obviously in my own library, so that's not audiophile, and it's not even enjoyable, actually. If you are trying to get vocals to sound correct at the expense of another instrument, then you're I don't know if you're going about it the right way. Which leads me to the final thing, which would be a glide. And that would be something that originally came to my mind a la the Elysian X by Elysian Acoustics. And that was like what became to me the golden line. And I would advise people that have a library like mine, which is rock and roll dominant, hip-hop, R&B, some reggae, and all of that really has, and a little bit of classical. Most of it has a bass guitar in it. That type of tuning where you've got a very steady, gradual glide from the sub-bass to the mid-bass and getting into the mids very subtle and gradually around just prior to just after 300 hertz seems to give the 4-string bass guitar a natural, energetic replay. The drum kit as well, the kick drum with force, and I can still get to my ears a clean male and female vocals because the husk hasn't really taken over either male or female vocals, because it's still okay at that point for me. So I decided to make my own personal target, basically a copy of the now discontinued Elysian X. I thought that was actually brilliant. So I won't go much further than this. I don't know how long this has been, but remember a few things. One is that you can hear the chord progression, E to A to D to G, if we isolate bass only, which makes a lot of sense. If we cut out bass completely and remove everything below 300 hertz, you can still clearly catch the progression, though it's really you're picking up the strings. That's the dominant portion of what you're getting right there. The other point is that 94% of this instrument exists out of the range that it's named after. A lot of people, that's going to be their takeaway from this video. That's why it is a thing that's talked about a lot. You either hear about it because it's being done well or it's getting in the way of other things. I can't think of an instrument that is more mentioned, vocals aside. There's no other instrument that I'm aware of that is mentioned more often as something that is an issue because it's not good enough or it's too much. It's the bass guitar, and it's about the tuning, and it's because 94% of it exists beyond the area that it's named after, which is what maybe gets people confused or annoyed, that an instrument that's called a bass guitar is interacting and causing problems well beyond that. Well, because it's 90% of it lives beyond the area it's named after. So that's the bass guitar. E standard tuning EADG.